Hi, I'm Luke Miller.
And I'm Amy Layton.
Welcome to Tea Time in Olympia. Today we're going to talk about Transgender Day of Remembrance, or TDOR, some people call it, which is coming up on November 20th.
It is. So let's jump right into this then. Let's talk a little bit about it. So I'm still a little new to TDOR.
Okay.
Or at least I'm going to pretend I am for purposes of learning. So what is Transgender Day of Remembrance?
So what TDOR is an international day of observance for transgender people to remember those members of the transgender community that have been taken from us by anti-trans violence. It started out, it was founded in 1999 by a trans woman named Gwendolyn Smith as a remembrance for her friend Rita Hester, who was murdered in Allston, Massachusetts that year.
Okay.
It started out as a small, just sort of web-based project, but people started to pick up on it, and by 2010, it had grown into an observance in over 185 cities in over 20 countries.
Oh wow, that's pretty big.
Yeah. It became a pretty much worldwide thing, which in a way is not good when you think about it, because that's an awful lot of trans people who have died, you know, due to hate-based violence.
Can I just step in and just this year alone, in the first 9 months, there were 22 trans women or trans people. There were 22 trans people murdered in the U.S. alone.
Yeah.
And globally, that number is really a lot higher. I don't know the statistics on, or the number right now, but...
Well, there was a rash of trans murders in Brazil, wasn't there?
Yes. In January this year, there were over 50 trans women murdered, or trans people.
Yeah.
And the cops didn't really do anything about it because it's not a big priority to people in other places of this country, or world, sorry.
Yeah, well, some people say that since 2015, anti-trans violence is actually on the rise, while it appears that violence against the cisgender, gay, lesbian, bisexual community is actually decreasing. Violence against transgender people and gender nonconforming people specifically is going up. And a lot of people feel that this is due to the bathroom bills and the other forms of political fear-mongering that have, characterized this election year.
Which there happen a lot. I mean, I know we battled in Washington. We've talked about it before, and thankfully it didn't get on the ballot this year, but I know that there are efforts underway next year for the same kind of bathroom bills, which can lead to harm towards trans people simply because people are afraid and don't quite understand. Yeah.
Well, fortunately, we have many groups and many allies in this state who are fighting hard against that, including our own Washington State Attorney General, who has really spearheaded the legal battle against allowing laws like that to be passed. But to get back to TDOR, tell me, how did the numbers of people, I understand that the vast majority of names on that list of names that gets read every year, the names of the dead, are overwhelmingly trans feminine people of color, particularly African American trans women.
And that's just because that's the nature of the beast itself. I mean, it's the statistic with non-trans people as well. Most people that are attacked are women of color, regardless of religion or nationality specifically.
Yeah, I've heard that it's something over 80% of the trans people who die every year are people of color, and of those 80%, 90% are African American.
Yes, yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
now, of course,
shocking.
So Trans Day of Remembrance ends up Trans Awareness Week, which is the week leading up to November 20th. So Gwen Smith started this. It kind of went viral. It became like a global thing. I understand that she's still trying to maintain some, I guess you'd say, intellectual property rights to the whole idea of TDOR. This is one of the kind of controversies surrounding, the event that's been a source of debate within the community.
Yeah.
whether she should retain those rights or whether she should just let this become the property of the trans community.
Well, I understand that there is quite the debate going on, but I feel personally that Trans Day of Remembrance is to remember every trans person, not just trans people of color who deserve to be recognized. And they deserve to be. We should respect that and recognize that.
Well, that sort of leads
I'm
into
not
another
saying
area of controversy because, of course, it was originally intended to commemorate all trans people who die because of violence. So there's kind of two areas of debate around this. Some people feel that because trans feminine people of color make up the vast majority of, people targeted for violence, they should be at the forefront and leading, Trans Day of Remembrance, its evolution. They should be, at the center of organizing events. I haven't heard anybody suggest that, white trans people shouldn't be involved or that they should, not hold events. But one of the arguments is that why do we wait until trans women of color are dead before we center them in our conversation? Why do we not do more to protect them while they're still alive? Why do we not do more to address the systemic sources of violence, like poverty, like police brutality, like,
just harassment
just racism in general, and the violence that's inherent in our economic and social institutions, that attacks the most vulnerable people in our community. Why are we not addressing that? And it's felt that the role of white, queer, and trans people in that should be, trying to address those institutional sources of violence more, and to, try and examine the ways in which we as white people benefit from those systems, even those of us who are queer and trans. And that the best thing that we can do is try to break down those systems so that, people, different communities, like communities of color, youth, people who are poor or homeless, people who are dealing with disabilities, veterans, other marginalized groups are not preferentially targeted for not just personal violence, but also institutional violence. I mean, I personally regard poverty as a form of violence. It is a violence done to some by the system, so that others can be benefited. So that's one area that has come under, a lot of scrutiny about Trans Day of Remembrance and how it should be thought of and how it should evolve. Trans activist Sarah Lamble in 2008 said, "It is not enough to simply honor the memory of the dead. We must transform the practices of the living." I mean, the goal is we want to get that list down to nobody.
Oh yeah.
We want to see a year, where we don't need a TDR because no one has been killed.
Well, I mean, and we are in the midst of the deadliest year for trans people in history.
Yeah.
And the violence just in the first 9 months, we surpassed all of last year's murders in the number, and it's on the rise. We were on a downward slope, and since the bathroom builds, we can actually track a rise in the numbers, and it's shocking because all those people saying, "Oh, it didn't cause a rise, it didn't cause this," but these bathroom bills are hate, and the hate led to this, which is now leading to more murders, which is now leading us to be sadder and fear for our lives even more.
Well, it's creating an atmosphere where it is once again, safe to attack transgender people.
Or anyone they perceive as trans.
Exactly.
Recently,
I mean, it's not just people who necessarily identify as transgender who wind up getting murdered. It's people who appear gender nonconforming to somebody, who for whatever reason, takes exception to a gender nonconforming person.
I mean, I saw recently that there was I saw an article. I haven't read it yet, so I don't know all the facts. So maybe I shouldn't talk about it. But
Well,
it was
you can tell
about
people where to
a
find it, though.
trans woman. You can find it on The Advocate.
Okay.
It was about a trans woman who was shot in the face in Indiana. And because of the laws there, it's not considered a hate crime, even though she was killed for being trans.
Right.
It's just considered a regular murder because they don't believe trans people have inherent rights in that state.
Right. Well, and that's another, whenever the people who compile the list of names, I mean, they do their research as best they can, but it should be noted that a lot of people who have been killed, in anti-trans bias crimes, don't always make it onto those lists for a number of reasons, largely because they are made invisible as trans people. They are quite often, police reports will refer to them by their,
assigned
names rather than chosen names, their assigned gender rather than true gender, and sometimes, if when next of kin are notified, if those next of kin are not supportive or accepting of that person's identity, their transness will just be hidden.
Yeah.
Will just be buried, and they'll never, come to the attention of the people who,
they'll never be seen.
They won't be remembered for who they really were. Another area of debate is there's been some question of whether those lists that we read at a typical TDOR event, the names of the dead, should include only people who've actually been murdered, or whether it should include people who have committed suicide or died because of some form of institutional violence or indifference, such as incarcerated people who've been killed in prison for being
trans,
or gender nonconforming.
Yeah.
It might include people like 19-year-old Tyra Hunter, who in the late 90s was in a car accident and died because EMTs stopped treating her when they discovered that she was a preoperative trans woman. It might include people like Robert Eads, a white trans man from Georgia who was allowed to die of ovarian cancer because he could not find a doctor who would treat a transsexual man.
I mean, it's shocking to see.
Yeah.
It's shocking to hear these stories because I've heard them before, and it's the same kinds of stories over and over playing out.
Yeah.
Someone who's trans dies, they get dead named, they get misgendered. Nobody really knows that they're trans because it's hidden, except the people who knew them.
And worst of all, people don't take an interest in that person until they're a statistic on a list.
And then they complain about the statistics skewing other statistics because because that's how deep this goes.
Yeah.
It's not enough that we die. We also have to endure just the stripping of who we are even after we're dead.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a hot topic for me.
It is a very emotional topic, and I should probably mention here that if this is a triggering topic for you, there are resources such as the Trans Lifeline, the Trevor Project, the It Gets Better Project, and also the GLBT National Help Center.
And
all of those have websites and hotlines that you can call. If you are finding yourself,
in
emotional difficulty because of the atmosphere of violence that we're living in, or because of the discussion of this topic, please, we'll
put those
if you
back
look at the
there
bottom of your screen, you'll see the websites and the phone numbers that you can call. But
so let's get back on topic. Let's try to lighten. Well, not lighten. We can't really lighten the subject with TDR, but
it is not a light subject. However, Trans Day of Remembrance also sort of blossomed out into some more, I guess you'd say, proactive or positive approaches to ending violence against transgender people.
Mm-hmm. Really?
One of these, for example, many people have come to celebrate, there's a project called Trans Day of Resilience that was put together by an organization called Forward Together, which supports all kinds of families in being able to access resources and find respect within the system. And what they did was they took 8 very talented trans and gender nonconforming artists, matched them with a number of organizations that serve trans people, and had them create these beautiful posters, which you can find online if you Google Trans Day of Resilience, as to advertise the organizations.
That participated.
Yeah, and the content of the posters is celebrating trans lives, particularly the lives of trans women of color. And some I've looked at these online, and they are absolutely beautiful. You know, and they're meant to be, you know, aimed at, you know, bringing an end, not only bringing an end to violence, but to helping trans people everywhere thrive and be their full authentic selves, you know, and find respect and dignity, you know, everywhere in society. So it's really a very positive approach that a lot of people are taking. And you know, there are people all over the U.S. who are working towards ending anti-trans violence. There's the you know, there's the Trans Justice, there's the Gender Justice League in Seattle and the Trans Justice Fund. There's the National Center for Transgender Equality. I recently read about a project in Washington, D.C. called Casa Ruby that was started by a trans woman named Ruby Corrado, who seems to have modeled her idea on the original Star Houses, which were started by Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson in the aftermath of the Stonewall riot in 1970, 1971. They began to set up houses where young trans women, particularly young trans women who were making a living on the streets doing sex work, were otherwise homeless, places where they could come and find shelter, food, safety, companionship.
Good. We need more places like that. We really do.
Yeah. Corrado's project seems to be, thankfully, a little bit better funded than the original Star Houses, but you know, she and a you know, collective of really terrific, committed people, you know, have made this dream a reality where they have basically a shelter, you know, and they're looking for funds to provide as many beds as possible, you know, for trans people who are experiencing homelessness or making a living through sex work or, you know, otherwise, you know, in unsafe situations to kind of, you know, come in out of the cold and find a safe place to be.
Yeah, we need more sanctuaries. I mean, I myself am part of starting a sanctuary for trans people to be able to get back on their feet when they've been displaced from discrimination at work or at home or during, you know, everything.
Yes.
Just be able to come, save for surgeries or recover or, you know, that's our dream. We're starting that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need more places like that, though.
Yes, we do. And I think it's especially important that we make those places safe and open for transgender youth.
Yes.
You know, as some people may know, some 40% of our homeless youth population identifies as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And quite a few of them, you know, become homeless because you know, their families are not accepting of their identities, and they're either, you know, thrown or you know, pressured out of their homes. You know, quite often they wind up on the street with no, you know, without ID, without cash, without resources, you know, without any place to go and no place, you know, no ability to, you know, earn a living or you know, find their own way out of that situation.
Yeah, that's what kept me from transitioning as a teenager, because I didn't want to lose everything that all my foundation. I didn't want to lose that and Not that I would have lost it,
Right.
but it was a very real thought on my mind and a very real reality that teens face.
Yes.
And most teens these days that are LGBT do face discrimination, and it shocks me. It shocks me still that families can't love their baby for who they are.
I know. It is difficult. And this is why, as a facilitator for Pizza Clutch, you know, and as a co-facilitator of our parent support group, you know, we try to head off those situations before they happen, to try to, you know, keep families together by helping parents and children to understand each other better. And, you know, sometimes, of course, it happens that we need to find a young person alternative resources. Fortunately, here in Olympia, we have a number of services for homeless youth, most of which are making a serious effort to become more queer and trans friendly, you know, safer places for GLBTQ youth who may need their services. But
can I just take a moment?
Sure.
To any trans youth that are out there watching this, you are not alone.
Yeah.
And your community loves you.
Yeah. And please think about calling the Trevor Helpline if you are in need of a friendly ear to talk to, or if you need to access services. Once again, look at those numbers at the bottom of your screen.
They'll be going around throughout the hour or throughout the episode.
Yeah.
So let's get back.
But we still don't know, for example, you know, how many of these deaths each year. I mean, we hear a lot about the ones that occur as a result of just what appears to be random individual violence. But we don't hear a lot about is the ones who are due to, for example, police brutality, or you know, people who are incarcerated, facing violence in prison. We don't hear about, you know, how many were targeted for violence, you know, because they were, you know, employed in sex work, or, you know, in some other, you know, clandestine profession that you know, carries risks of its own.
You know, I feel it's important to point out right now that we're talking a lot about trans people and sex work, but I have to point out that good 90%, or at least I can clearly say at least 75% of all trans people live under the poverty line.
Yes.
And for trans people to do sex work, it was known for a long time as the only option for getting surgery to have the money to pay for it.
Well, for some people, it's the only option to survive. As long as trans people are excluded, you know, from most professions, you know, as long as it is still legal to discriminate on the basis of gender identity or presentation, as long as trans people are still, you know, one of the most chronically unemployed and underemployed and underinsured groups in the United States, you know, for many people, you know, these professions remain the only possibility for survival. You know, we don't hear a lot about, you know, how many are experiencing homelessness. We don't hear a lot about how many are HIV positive or living with AIDS because they are not able to access, you know, proper health care, you know, drug treatments and other services for people with AIDS. You know, there's, if we expand our definition of violence, you know, those lists get much, much longer.
They do. They do.
You know, sometimes maybe, you know, I mean, the average Trans Day of Remembrance event, you know, might last for an hour or so. There's a limit to how many names you can read.
Yeah, I remember that you and I were on the planning committee for TDR last year and the year before, and I remember going over the list and saying, okay, what can we realistically talk about? Like, how many names can we do?
Yeah.
And we read as many as we thought was possible in the time frame that we had, but there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more names.
Just far too many.
You know,
I mean, one is one too many.
Yes, one is one too many.
Yeah. And again, you know, for every name that we have on a list, there's who knows how many more that do not appear on that list because, you know,
because they weren't reported
yeah,
rightfully.
because,
they were
right.
reported as who they were not. And
Yeah, chronic underreporting of anti-trans violence is another problem because there's such distrust between the queer community and the police.
Which is
And that is sad to say for good historical reasons.
Yes, yes, it is. It's justifiable and it's justifiable distrust as well as unjustifiable in the same sense. It's one of those 50-50, but I would have to say that overwhelmingly it's hard to trust the authorities.
Yeah.
When
especially
when
they're often responsible for the violence.
Yes, yes, but we also need to respect that we have to work with them in order to change that violence at a fundamental level.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that too is a matter for debate, but I personally hope, that going forward we can bring some kind of positive relationship, out of a very, very difficult history. We did one of our community members did do some good work last year aimed at reducing violence against trans people within the criminal justice system.
Here in Olympia.
Yeah, by sitting down with the Olympia police and creating a housing policy for the Olympia jail that takes into account a person's gender identity as well as their past record, their safety, and the other factors that the police look at when they decide whether to house someone in the men's section or the women's section of their still unfortunately very binary
facilities,
jail housing system.
Yeah.
But at least now some competency training has been done. Some more is on the way in 2017, I'm told.
Oh, good, good.
That officers are at least now learning how to talk respectfully to trans people, to take their identities into account.
Oh, that's good.
So,
I can tell from firsthand experience, because I've had to deal with one with a couple of friends recently.
Yeah.
That they were very respectful. They did use a dead name, but they realized that it was a dead name and apologized and started using the proper name and pronoun, the legal name and proper pronoun.
Good.
And it was a stark change from the city that I grew up in. I'm not saying that Olympia's been bad, but I grew up in a time when it was still socially okay, not acceptable, but still looked the other way upon.
Right.
For beating up the feminine boy, or
exactly.
in the middle of the school grounds kind of thing, in the middle of lunch period.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a place now in the same city. It's now not okay to house a trans woman in the men's facilities at prison, which, I mean, it's progress. It's progress. It's slow. It's been slow progress, but it's been progress nonetheless.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, there will always be those people who say, you cannot change the system from within. You have to break it apart from without and create a new system. Where I personally fall in that debate is, I guess, something I'm still kind of working out. But in any case, so TDOR has grown really quite amazingly from its beginnings in 1999. It's observed all over the world. It's led to
Trans Day
of
Pride.
Action, Trans Day of Awareness, Trans Day of Resilience, and quite a number of different approaches. And of course, we will have to continue the conversation about, how are we going to make that list smaller and smaller until TDOR is no longer necessary.
Yeah.
And how are we going to, address the systemic, foundations of violence? How are we going to address things like, the forms of toxic masculinity that lead people to beat up someone that they perceive as, insufficiently masculine, for example? How are we going to change the criminal justice system, to reduce violence in our prisons? How are we going to change our economic system so that nobody has to be starving on the street? How are we going to change the way we deal with our youth to make sure that they are empowered and safe?
I mean, there's more houses in this country than homeless people, so why not give these homeless people a house to live in, people? It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
We can feed and house everyone in this country if everyone pulls in their fair share.
Yeah.
And we can't do that all together. So I just don't see that happening anytime soon. I love America, but it can be greedy sometimes.
Well, what it means is that we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
And we're only going to get that done if we all do it together. So I don't know if there's much more to say then about TDOR.
Well, we've talked a lot about it,
yeah.
but maybe you could kind of go over what happens at a TDOR event.
Well, at a typical TDOR event, usually there's some speakers. Somebody may tell their story about having experienced anti-trans discrimination or violence. At the ones that we've thrown here at Olympia in the past, we've had local GLBTQ and supportive organizations come and talk about the services they offer. Traditionally, the central ritual of a TDOR event is that reading of the list of names, usually accompanied by some action like ringing a bell or lighting a candle for each name, as an act of memorializing the people we have lost.
I remember my first TDOR a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I was the one that was standing there holding the candle. As the names were read, people would walk up and light the candle and go stand in solidarity.
Yeah.
And it was a very sobering experience for my first TDOR. And
it's a somber day of observance.
Because we've lost family. We've lost. We don't personally know them, but we know their struggle, and we've felt their struggle, and we have felt that same kind of pain, not that exact pain, but we have. It's a shared experience amongst trans people.
Yeah, and it's many people feel that it's a responsibility of those of us who are still here, especially those of us, who enjoy a certain amount of privilege and are maybe not quite as vulnerable to violence, as some more vulnerable members of the community, to not only to remember the people that we have lost, but to understand why those people were taken from us, and to recognize that, the loss of even one trans sister or brother or sibling is one loss too many. It's an irreparable loss to the community. And, hopefully that act of remembering the dead will make us more determined to protect the living.
Well, change comes as it comes, and we can't force it. We can't push it.
We can.
We can push it. We can force it sometimes, but we can't always force it to be how we want it to be.
Well,
and it's going to take some
when we have one of the strengths of our community is its diversity. Trans people come from every race, every country, every culture, every religion, every walk of life, every economic background.
You name
every
it, there's
language.
been a trans person there.
Yeah. And what that means, among other things, that's true of the GLBTQ community in general, and often what that means is that, sometimes those multiple intersecting identities conflict with each other, among individuals. Sometimes, we disagree on what's the best way to move forward. But, still in all, we managed to create community around, these specific aspects of our identities.
Well, it's because we all understand that we can have differing opinions on subjects, and we can want something to happen one way while respecting that it should happen another way or could happen another way. And the thing I like about the trans community is that we have all these different opinions, but we can come together and recognize that we have to do change. We can't argue. We can't argue semantics about what word means what. We have to get the point across. We have to get stuff changed. We can't do that if we're always arguing about how to do these events.
We have to recognize that, none of us is free until all of us are free. And we have to realize that when we fight among ourselves, that is exactly what the enemy wants.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that those of us who enjoy privilege shouldn't examine how our privilege is bought at the expense sometimes of our own other parts of our community. Ultimately, I guess we just we have to move forward together as best we can, and I think that's going to be a long and difficult road.
But not impossible.
Yeah.
It can be done, and it will be done.
Yeah.
It's just we're on that road.
Yes, we are.
And we're all sharing the experience, and we're all learning and growing and moving forward and changing this world into a better place simply by being ourselves.
Yes.
Because, that's my philosophy in life, is be the change you wish to see in this world.
Yeah.
And here I am being that change. And it's people like you and me and others in the trans community out there having our voices and trying to have them heard or having them heard or changing little bits here and there that ultimately make the change. I've done my little bit to change here and there throughout this community, and I know you have, and I know other people who have. It's all of us coming together. It's not pulling apart that brings us together as a community.
Right.
I don't know. I don't word stuff right sometimes.
Did we get to all of our questions?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
So let's start.
Well,
the closing.
We don't know that there are any Trans Day of Remembrance events happening here in the Olympia area.
Generally, I haven't heard anything happening this year, but generally there's one at GAS, Gender Alliance of Southtown.
Usually holds one up in Tacoma.
Up
There
in
will certainly
Tacoma.
be probably several happening in Seattle.
Oh, of course. There's always a couple happening up there. I'm an Olympia girl, so I don't know a whole lot about other places in this state.
Right.
But I just know that usually there's one at SPSCC. I don't know if there is this year, but I would not be surprised if there were. You'll have to look more, more in depth on that.
Yes, for more information about TDOR events that may be happening in the local area.
Well, there's a website called transgenderdayofremembrance.org or TDOR.org, I believe.
Yeah.
That actually gives all the statistics, or not all the statistics, but tells a little bio about the people that have been murdered this year, or compiles a list of them so you can see who all and what numbers. And also they compile a list of events from around the country and around the world that you can go on and see if there's one in your local state or city or country.
Yeah.
To anyone watching from other places. But I highly suggest going there, and if you have more questions about TDOR that we couldn't answer today, that would be a great place to look.
Yeah.
Or at
And
least
consider starting a TDOR event of your own
Yes,
in your community. It isn't difficult to do.
It can be difficult at times.
Well, it can
I will
be,
say that.
but it's the sort of thing that's open for anyone with the imagination and the determination to try and put together.
Doesn't have to be huge and extravagant. It can just be a couple people getting together and talking about TDOR or talking about those who were killed and remembering them.
And maybe more importantly, talking about the people who are still alive and working towards a world without anti-trans violence. And I guess that's the message I would like to leave our audience with today, is that it's not just about reading a list of names and mourning losses, although that is a very important component of TDOR. It's also about looking ahead and letting the experience make you more determined to take care of each other while we're still alive, and make sure that we live and that we thrive into the future, especially our youth, especially the vulnerable members of our community.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time that we start our closing.
Yes. thank you very much for joining us today. And
thank you very much for joining us today. We learned a lot about TDOR. I hope you did. This is where I'd probably put the lines about about this is where I'm going to splice in the old closings so that we have all this stuff said about.
Yes.
About
and remember
the
that if
projects
you need to talk to someone, if you need assistance, please don't forget that the Trans Lifeline, which was launched in 2014, is the first crisis prevention hotline specifically for trans people. It is staffed by trans people, who can relate to your experience. Don't hesitate to call them. Don't hesitate to call the Trevor Project, or the It Gets Better Project, or the GLBT National Help Center.
And all those names you'll have seen at the bottom of the screen, and with the names and numbers and the websites, and I'll try to put a link in the description if I can, but I'm not entirely sure what to do because I'm not technological.
Yes. Okay. Well,
thank you very
much
much
for joining us.
And next time, we hope to see you next time.